you're watching Initiative Africa. My name is Asha Samput. Welcome to your weekly magazine featuring Africa on the move through smart innovations and initiatives that work. Today we look at African civil society's fight for ecological justice, and with our guest, we turn to the actions and the role of the diaspora in Africa. Well, it's time for Initiative Africa. Let's get on with the show with our top stories today. Our guest is an entrepreneur who firmly defends the values of women from the continent's diaspora. She has seen quite closely the different aspects of immigration of African women before deciding to set up her own business. Her mission today is to guide the actions of African women from the diaspora in France. Suzanne Bellnoun, president of OAWD, the Organisation of African Women in the Diaspora, is on our show today.
L'objectif, c'est de donner de la visibilité.
The aim is to give visibility to the actions taken by women both in France and our home countries.
Que dans nos pays d'origine.
No to environmental damage. African civil society is seeking to raise awareness about the concept of ecological justice.
I see this ecological justice as a conversation that's supposed to drive innovation through the community lens and even understanding the indigenous people.
Spotlight on the world of visually impaired people in Cameroon. In Yaoundé, they met the potential for emancipation, inspired by an NGO in a spirit of community sharing.
We had to create a project to get the visually impaired and blind out of their comfort zone, their home, their sedentary lifestyle.
Mozambique, Senegal, Tanzania, Mauritania, South Africa, Ethiopia and Morocco. All these countries have one thing in common: huge gas reserves. This means an economic boost for these nations, but often at the price of an environmental sacrifice for neighboring communities, particularly in coastal ecosystems. Faced with this complex balance, the demand for environmental justice is gaining ground in Africa. Civil society players are mobilizing themselves in Nigeria, an oil-producing country where several legal actions have been taken against multinationals. Our correspondent in Abuja, Hugo Yuwana, followed their discussions. Take a look.
The right to a safe environment for every Nigerian is guaranteed under the Section 20 of the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Despite this, the myriads of ecological challenges in the country have been a source of concern and triggered advocacy by various stakeholders. Access to justice is made stiff by lax environmental laws, a lack of independent judiciary and judicial institutions, and an absence of will to enforce compliance of legal provisions.
We must understand that we are part and parcel of an ecological formation, of which, if the other side of it is destroyed, we have also destroyed ourselves. If we don't have trees, we are going to run out of ability to breathe oxygen, because without carbon dioxide there won't be oxygen. If you don't have water, you have nothing to drink. If you pollute your air, you are going to die slowly and most likely very young.
According to the Rise for Bayelsa, a global campaign that aims to highlight the environmental and human damage caused by multinational oil companies operating in the Niger Delta, about 40 million liters of oil are spilled every year across the Delta. In 2012 alone, 16,000 babies died there within the first month of their life because of oil pollution. These numbers have risen over the years. This is just one out of the many damages caused by ecological disasters.
It was a big mistake for Nigeria to abandon the economic pathway it was pursuing to now delve into the petroleum business and forget about everything else. That is what has destroyed Nigeria. The biggest problem now is the divestment. It's a move by international oil companies to leave the Niger Delta and take their profits, either move offshore or go back home. We need to have a clear regulation, a clear policy and guideline about what divestment means and how it can be done.
Ecological health-related risks are becoming a major concern in Nigeria, with diverse environmental problems such as air pollution, water pollution, oil spillage, deforestation, desertification, erosion, and flooding due to inadequate or no drainage systems at all, caused mostly by anthropogenic activities.
The oil business in the Niger Delta has been the greatest polluter of the environment of the Niger Delta, and so by extension, the pollution of Nigeria. They pollute the air with gas flaring. Some of us are actually living dead, but we don't know it. So we just fall down any moment and die.
Today, Africa is facing multiple ecological challenges. All of these resulted from the actions of entities that have seen the continent as a sacrificial zone. According to a report on the struggle for environmental justice in Africa, written by environmental activist Nemo Bassi for the Independent Media Institute, a mere 1% of the labor force in the extractive sector in Africa are Africans. A mere 5% of investment in the sector is in Africa, and more than 85% of the infrastructure for fossil gas in the continent is for export purposes.
I see this ecological justice as a conversation that's supposed to drive innovation through the community lens and even understanding the indigenous people, because that is the only life or only way we can be able to, restore our ecosystem and make our ecosystem work for the people and the planet.
We are an ecological think tank. Our major focus is knowledge generation and sharing. I think we've made a lot of progress because communities are clearer about their demands and clearer about how to protect the environment. The only challenge is that the transgressors are also sinking their claws deeper or trying to avoid accountability. And this is where we're focusing, that nobody should escape accountability.
Indeed, various communities in the Niger Delta states, Akwa Ibom, Rivers, Bayelsa, etc., farmers, fishermen, and individuals have tried to get justice from the erring big oil corporations. One of the cases took 13 years before justice was served, but yet nothing has been done to compensate the individuals from the host communities. Nemo Bassi, HOMEF's director, remains focused on ensuring the speedy implementation of the various court rulings involving the erring big corporations and the host communities via his forum, Polluters Judgment Roundtable, which offers a glimmer of hope in the quest to get environmental justice in Nigeria.
As I mentioned earlier, our guest Suzanne Bellnoun is president of the OAWD, the Organization of African Women in the Diaspora. The main objective of this organization is to combat the feeling of invisibility felt by these women, but also to oversee their actions on the continent in coordination with local organizations. She spoke to Laurent Soustras and Thierry Schiller.
Suzanne Bellnoun, hello.
Bonjour.
Welcome on Initiative Africa. You are the president of the Organization for African Women of the Diaspora. Can you briefly introduce your association?
Alors, l'Organisation des femmes africaines de la diaspora, c'est une plateforme.
The Organization for African Women of the Diaspora is a platform for African women entrepreneurs, association leaders and business executors. The organization was created in 2011.
L'organisation a été créée en 2011. L'objectif, c'est de donner de la visibilité aux actions.
The aim is to give visibility to the actions taken by women, both in France and our home countries, because we have long suffered from invisibility.
Souffert de l'invisibilité.
Alors, quelles sont ces actions?
So what are these actions? Hasn't it become very complicated in certain countries in West and Central Africa? I'm thinking of Burkina Faso, Mali and now Niger.
We
have to remain in touch with women. It is essential for us because with all the sanctions hanging over their heads, it's tough for men.
Les premières à en souffrir, ce sont toujours les femmes.
The first to suffer are always the women and children. Let's not kid ourselves. So our mobilization, this bridge, this connection, is also to alleviate the risks.
Ça peut être matériel, ça peut être moral.
It can be material, it can be moral, but this network has an impact on women.
Sur les femmes.
Si je comprends bien, c'est le contact entre votre
The bond or connection that you've created between your association and local associations on the ground enables those actions to come to life.
En fait, c'est pas le FAD, mais nous sommes en contact avec les
Not
réseaux,
the Organization for the African Women of the Diaspora, but we are in contact with local African networks because the members come from various countries, and so we are
les
told
membres viennent de divers pays. Et donc, quand chacune nous dit, ah ben, il y a une association.
that there's an association of Senegalese in Morocco or an association from my country in Morocco. Let's connect with them to see their needs and what we can do.
Qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire?
Qu'est-ce que cette approche
And what has this approach achieved so far? Is it working?
bien, selon vous?
Mais les résultats sont très, très, très importants, très intéressants.
The results are very important and enlightening. We have an event that we have been running since 2014.
Menons depuis 2014. Le Forum
The Economic Forum of African Women and Women of the Diaspora.
Et en 2019, nous l'avions transféré.
In 2019, we transferred it to Africa, specifically Cameroon. So it's an opportunity for African women and women from the diaspora to discuss, share, and see how far they can work together.
Travailler ensemble. C'est l'occasion aussi de.
It's also an opportunity for them to meet investors participating in these events.
Ces événements, des financiers, parce que c'est pas évident pour
It's not easy for women, particularly African women, to find finance when they want to start a business.
Quand elles veulent entreprendre. Donc cet espace offre.
So this space, this platform offers that opportunity, and since 2014, we've seen a lot of results.
De résultats.
Et donc cette plateforme, ce rôle d'interface entre
And so
le
this
Nord
platform,
et le
somehow
Sud
an
qui fonctionne,
interface between the North and
qu'est-ce que
South, is
vous
working. What would you
voudriez
like to
encore
see
voir
improved?
améliorer?
Nous voulons l'amélioration que nous attendons.
We are hoping for improvement for institutions and decision makers to listen to us more, because we hardly heard at all.
Un peu plus écoutés, parce que nous ne le sommes presque pas. Bon, ça vient doucement, timidement, mais.
It's coming slowly, timidly, but the female diaspora is not taken into account when we talk about the diaspora.
N'est pas tellement prise en compte quand on parle de la diaspora. Et nous expliquons ça par le fait que.
And when we explain this by the fact that African women have always been seen as migrant women and seen as women who have come to reunite with their families and are therefore depending on their husbands.
Et donc, dépend le mari, on ne peut rien attendre d'elle économiquement, alors que c'est un tort.
We can't expect anything from them economically, which is absolutely wrong. There has been a real shift as more and more women are coming independently. These are women who've had a career in their own country. Unfortunately, when they arrive here, the experience is not being taken into account.
Malheureusement, quand elles arrivent ici, bon, c'est pas pris en compte. Et même les jeunes générations qui sont nées
And
ici,
even the younger generations who are born here, who have studied here, the same story with their mothers continues. They continue to be seen as that
continuent à
woman.
porter l'image de cette femme-là. Donc, nous attendons
So we're waiting for African women in the diaspora to be taken seriously.
puissent être prises en compte dans les
In the
démarches.
politics, it is starting to happen. Political and economic processes.
Qu'elles soient prises en compte. Et nous avons fait un travail
We've
là-dessus
worked to
qui nous
do
a
some
permis de
advocacy
faire
through money
le
transfers,
plaidoyer à
so it was
travers le
important
transfert
for us to
d'argent.
prove that African women in the
Il était
diaspora
important pour
are
nous
economic assets.
d'apporter la preuve que la femme africaine de la diaspora est une force économique. Et ça ne
And
pouvait
that
se
could
faire
only
qu'à
be done
travers
through their contribution in terms
son
of money
apport en matière
transfers.
de transfert d'argent. Parce qu'on sait, vous savez bien que la diaspora aujourd'hui,
As
c'est
you
le
know,
premier
the
bailleur de
diaspora has been a significant
pays
source of
africains.
funds for African countries, but when we tried to find out the contribution of women to these large sums of money transferred by the diaspora, it turned out that the institutions had never done an estimate.
Que la diaspora transfère, il s'est avéré que les institutions n'ont jamais fait ce travail. Et c'est avec
And with a great deal of determination, we were able to come up with these elements, which we are now using as advocacy tools.
aujourd'hui d'outils de plaidoyer.
Welcome to the second part of our show. Before we go back to our guest Suzanne Bellnoun, let's look at one of the initiatives of the African diaspora on the continent, the initiative of social entrepreneur VEN. He wanted to bring to Cameroon, his native country, the concept of his association, Déficients Visuels Lancez-vous, which aims to break down the isolation of the visually impaired. His NGO has launched an ambitious project to include disabled people through more innovative and diversified solutions than those usually available to them. This is a report by our correspondent Abubakar Siddiq Munchili. A trip to his country of origin to meet young people suffering from visual impairment. VEN has dreamed of it for several years. This social entrepreneur from the Cameroonian diaspora in France was evacuated from his birth country at a very young age due to a severe eye disease.
Growing up in Cameroon, I didn't know what it meant to be handicapped. For me, a disabled person was someone who was in a wheelchair, someone who was lame, as we often say here. And when I left, I didn't quite understand it. It's when I came to France that I really discovered that disability restricts you to being part of the disabled community. So I discovered a world that was a little sedentary, a world that was also not really aware of its potential, its talent, and a world that had no future.
Visually impaired himself, VEN was revolted by his experience, and he became determined to embark on this permanent fight to empower the visually impaired and blind by freeing them from the obstacles and other prejudices hindering their development.
For me, it was a revolt. That's how I slowly realized we had to create a project to get the visually impaired and blind out of their comfort zone, their home, their sedentary lifestyle. The aim is to make the visually impaired become actors of their own emancipation and aspirations, and that's why I always wanted to come back to Cameroon.
Returning to Cameroon after nearly 10 years of preparation to kickstart this long adventure beside the young visually impaired people across the African continent, VEN has chosen to do it through concrete solutions and a solid project. His NGO, DV Lancez-vous and Share the Cola concept, named after this fruit from the cola tree in the form of a nut, very popular in Africa, and which is eaten here in community together and has occupied an important place in the local traditions.
The cola is shared in the community. We decided to launch the Share the Cola concept because we learn with the cola and with the blind and visually impaired who teach us with their cola. This is the start of a long and extensive collaboration because they bring a successful concept from Europe, everything that they've implemented in Europe. They come here with great ideas, with everything that's already been done in the field.
Well, I think that meetings like this are critical, and it brings light into our lives and remove the shadows, the darkness in the minds of people who live with a disability. This meeting in Yaoundé was a great opportunity to present the content of this initiative and to offer young people a whole plethora of activities for 2 days. Debates, screenings, workshops, coaching, field trips, among others. This is the ongoing work that has started a year ago.
And with a series of discussions, we talk, we share, we tell stories, we exchange stories about our lives and how we got to where we are now.
Training is precisely at the heart of the strategy and actions of DV Lancez-vous, which intends to take advantage of the enormous opportunities offered by digital technologies today.
We are creating synergies where we provide distance training because much is done for the blind and visually impaired thanks to new technologies, IT, and we also help with the materials that we can provide. But our main task is not to donate materials. We mainly offer business, psychological and recreational support, and above all, helping them meet and go beyond their potentials.
A win-win for the association for the assistance and support of vulnerable and disabled children, Marche en Avant, and its foster home for these young people in the heart of the town of Soa, suburb of the capital Yaoundé. I worked for a long time in a center for the blind, and there I saw the way children were cared for. I spent 11 years there, and one fine day, some children came, 4 blinds, and I welcomed them into my home. They spent the holidays. Every morning they went out to play the tam-tam on the streets to get something to eat. I was touched by that. I said to myself, why such talented children need to go to beg when they can have a normal life and also a better life later?
An idea that Yves Wansi and his teammate Achille Guem, a talented actor-artist also from the Cameroonian diaspora, have experimented. Introducing these young people to the theatre is the way to support this project.
Knowing the amorphous situation of someone with a visual impairment, who either has his head down all the time or is totally marginalized because isolation is all he can look forward to, a withdrawn person who doesn't even trust his own limbs, at least the ones that still function. So theatre is a great opportunity. They learn to speak in public, express themselves, and also it's some sort of physical awakening for their bodies. There are so many great tools we can give them.
The stakes are therefore high for this NGO committed through this model of raising awareness about visual impairment, using innovative actions for the inclusion of these people who have an outstretched hand towards society.
They must be taught to dream. I think when you have a disability, you don't dream. You don't have dreams anymore, whether it's in Cameroon, France, or anywhere. They believe it's their destiny. When you achieve something with your disability, you tell yourself that you can go beyond the limits of disability and you can do great things.
After Yaoundé in Cameroon, Yves Wansi and his team are already thinking of other African capitals and cities. In the line of sight, Cotonou in Benin or Dakar in Senegal, where they are keenly awaited by their younger peers.
We are now with our guest, Suzanne Bellnoun, who explains how her organization of African women in the diaspora has adapted to the new profile of African migrants and is now responding to a very different challenge, assisting second and third generation representatives who want to return home and set up their businesses. Take a look.
Mrs. Bellnoun, what is your background and how did you come to chair the OAWD Association?
Alors, mon parcours personnel est un peu atypique.
My background is atypical. Like most African women, I was trained as a hotelier, so I worked as a general housekeeper for over 16 years.
Pendant plus de 16 ans dans l'hôtellerie de luxe en France.
In the luxury hotel industry in France, the Accor Group, Hyatt and Disney. At a certain point, I considered myself privileged to hold positions of responsibility compared to the women I saw because I had to recruit my staff.
D'occuper des postes de responsabilité par rapport à celles que je voyais, puisque j'étais amené à recruter mon
When I found myself with quite educated, qualified women who came to apply as chambermaids.
Comme femme de chambre avec un bagage.
And they were highly qualified.
Oui, diplômés. Et par la suite, après 16 ans, bon,
Yes, graduates. And then after 16 years, I got a bit fed up with being an employee and thought about setting up my own business.
Créer ma propre structure. Et dans ce parcours, j'ai vu le parcours du combattant, de la femme.
In the process, I saw the obstacles faced by African, migrant and black women who want to set up their own business.
Noir qui veut créer une entreprise. À partir de là, j'ai commencé à comprendre.
From there, I began to understand why some women make do with very little.
Se contentaient de peu. Ça nous a interpellés et donc avec un certain nombre.
It got to us, and so with several friends, we decided to set up this network.
Dans un premier temps, le but était d'aller chercher ces informations.
Initially, the aim was to find information we didn't think was available to us and share it with others who, like us, wanted to start their own business.
Qui, comme nous, voulait se mettre.
So we called it integration through business creation.
Par la création d'entreprises. Et donc, nous avons même eu à faire de la sensibilisation.
And we even had to do some awareness raising here at Château Rouge in Paris to inform women about how they can become entrepreneurs and what initiatives exist to help them out. So some followed.
Donc certaines ont suivi. Plus on découvrait.
The more we discovered the field realities, the more passionate we became about finding answers.
Des réponses par nous-mêmes.
Le profil des premières femmes africaines de la diaspora.
The profile of the first African women in the diaspora and that of young people, as well as the second or third generation of youth from the diaspora, are different.
Totalement différents. Quelle évolution avez-vous perçue? Comment faites-vous
What changes have you seen?
cette fusion, en quelque sorte?
That's what makes the Organization for African Women of the Diaspora so special. It's an intergenerational platform where everyone has something to contribute. Young people often try to help us adapt to new technologies because that's different from what we do. And they need our experience, backgrounds, and learn from our journey, especially when they do business in our home countries. Because young people are increasingly interested in going there, and they have been nicknamed the repats as opposed to expats. But when they go there, they don't understand the business codes.
Et quand elles doivent y aller, elles n'ont pas les codes. Donc, l'espace leur permet d'acquérir.
So the platform allows them to acquire this knowledge to avoid any bad surprises.
Elles ne vont pas prendre.
For example, they are not going to take the Eiffel Tower to Douala, Yaoundé, and N'Djamena or Dakar. So they need to be immersed in the reality.
Un peu dans la réalité.
Otherwise, it can be tough for them.
Quel regard portez-vous sur cette vague d'immigration de jeunes africains?
How do you look at this wave of immigration by young Africans, many young women, often with children, and this dangerous Mediterranean crossing to reach Europe? What can your association do both in France and Africa? What can our association do? I can tell you, nothing. Nothing. And why is that? Because we are not involved in the process. We have never even been consulted, which we think is a shame. When there's a talk about immigration, migrants are absent. You'll see this on all the television programs, in all the debates. So what do you expect us to do if we are excluded?
Sur le terrain, nous sensibilisons.
We try to tell them the truth about what awaits them in Europe. It means giving them the means to say no. All is not lost. You can get through this. You're not the only one in this situation. Everything is still possible.
Donc voilà une direction au lieu d'aller prendre le risque.
So here's a direction instead of taking the risk in the Mediterranean. But otherwise, officially speaking, we are not involved.
Nous ne sommes pas impliqués.
Vous prenez prochainement la route de l'Allemagne. Est-ce que la
You'll soon be heading for Germany.
Africaine au niveau de l'Europe, est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui a
Can the African diaspora in Europe help to accentuate this public debate?
Finalement, de ce débat public?
Oui, mais c'est justement ça ce que nous essayons.
Yes, but that's precisely what we're trying to do, to create these spaces and even invite authorities, whether from our countries of origin or host countries.
De nos pays d'origine ou des accueillants. Des plateformes au niveau européen de la
European diaspora platforms exist. We are becoming increasingly aware that we must work together.
Que nous devons nous concerter et essayer de sortir des éléments
and develop arguments to put before the decision makers.
Pour amener devant les décideurs, parce que c'est pas nous qui prenons des décisions, malheureusement.
Unfortunately, we are not the ones making the decisions, but we're not short of ideas, even if they don't consider them, because I'll tell you, for example, the situation we are in today. I started talking about it in 2006.
J'ai commencé à en parler depuis 2006, par rapport à ce que je voyais sur le terrain.
About what I was seeing on the ground. I wondered at that time if the French diplomacy in Africa saw what was happening in 2006. Today they seem to be surprised, but we are not. Thank you very much, Suzanne Bellnoun. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, that's it. Initiative Africa is over for today. You can find the interview of Suzanne Bellnoun as well as our shows on our website, africaonair.com. And of course, feel free to follow us on all our social media channels by liking, sharing and commenting with the hashtag Initiative Africa. And don't forget, next week, same time, same channel, I'll see you again for a new edition of Business Africa. Have a great week, and until next time, goodbye.